As we're approaching the end of 2024, I wanted to take a look back at some of the horror movies that I've seen over the past few years that really stuck out to me. The 2010s gave us a sort of resurgence in respectable horror movies, and so far it seems the 2020s are not only continuing that trend, but improving on it quite a bit. If you're a huge horror movie connoisseur, then maybe you'll find this list to be a bit basic, but these movies stuck out to a wide audience for a reason. They're good horror movies. But hopefully most of you watching will find at least one or two gems to add to your list, maybe a bunch, or maybe none, who knows, but let's get into 10 of the best horror movies of the 2020s so far. So I figured I'm going to start off with a pretty controversial one to be on this list of horror movies. Despite all the trailers and marketing describing this movie as the scariest movie ever made, or the scariest one since The Exorcist or any other crazy title, this movie didn't really live up to a lot of people's hype, and I completely understand that. And that's why this movie kind of lived and died by its marketing. I remember hearing about this movie pretty early on, being intrigued by the teasers and involved in the discussions around deciphering what the symbols meant in the trailers, hearing that Nicolas Cage was in this movie despite not being in the teasers. The whole marketing gimmick is what propelled the hype even further online by people like myself, because I truly hadn't been this excited for a horror movie in a long time. And the movie itself is pretty good. Is it the scariest movie of all time good? No, absolutely not. But I remember being incredibly intrigued by the mystery in the first and second acts. The whole tone is eerie and unsettling, and maybe it's because I had just got done playing Alan Wake 2, but I was really into this whole FBI researching the case that's close to home, and it reminded me quite a bit of the game. There were some unexpected turns in the first and second acts of the movie. Micah Monroe and Nicolas Cage were both fantastic. It's really that final third act that brings this movie down for me. There's a scene that's treated like it's this giant reveal of the backstory, but I thought this reveal was so obvious that it must be a red herring for some other twist, and it wasn't. The supernatural aspects are intriguing, but also a little half-baked, but if you go into this movie with expectations that aren't, this is the scariest movie of all time, then you'll probably end up having a good time. Given as how this is a horror movie list, let's give this 2 ratings. I'm going to do an overall rating and a scariness rating. So I'll go 7.5 out of 10 for the overall rating, and scare factor, I'm going to go like 5 out of 10. Barbarian is a movie that really sticks out to me because of how 2020s it really is. And that's a trend with a lot of the films on this list. While a lot of genres can sometimes feel stuck in the past, horror is a genre that actually likes to keep up with the times because everything new in our lives offers up a new opportunity for thrills in a horror movie. Barbarian centers on a girl who gets an Airbnb in some sketchy location to find that it's already being rented by somebody who seems equally as sketchy. Would you spend the night with a man you don't know in a stranger's home? This is a really great and new premise because of how it relates to the new advancements in our world, and this movie was initially based off of a short film, and it really does feel that way. The first 2 acts, or maybe even like act and a half, feel very fully realized. There's some great tension and misdirection, and we even start to trust and care for the characters. When the secrets start unraveling and we have no context for any of it, each new reveal or location feels incredibly scary because you don't know what's coming next or what to expect. Then the movie switches points of view, not to some other ordinary person or new customer, but to the rich owner of the place, a character that we immediately don't care for and never really grow to care for either. There's some thematic through lines because of this character that end up coming around really well, but this is the part of the movie that feels like you can tell it was originally just a short film and all of this was just tacked on afterwards. And by the third act, we get these really terrible cliche moments that just feel like they came from an entirely different film than the first 45 minutes. So as a film overall, I'll give Barbarian a 7 out of 10, and for the scare factor, I'll go 6.5 out of 10. Smile is the film that I've watched most recently on this list, and it actually inspired this video because I was like, wow, there have been a lot of really great horror movies recently, so I went and compiled this list. I remember seeing the trailer for this movie and subsequently the second one and thinking, that looks a little cheesy, but after hearing good things and finally watching it, this movie is anything but cheesy. Right from the start, this movie does an incredible job of showing the audience what they need to see instead of telling us. We can see that Rose is a workaholic and likes to help people because of the opening flashback to her mom's death, and because right as she's about to leave work, she comes back because she hears her phone ringing. This is much better than her just blatantly saying out loud, well, you know, I'm a workaholic. This sets her down the course of events in the movie, which comes along with some absolutely incredible scares, a lot of them really unique, and what I love most about this movie is how it finds that balance between explaining what's going on and leaving enough of a mystery to keep the scares scarier. A lot of horror films get really bogged down with going into the details, like if this movie went to lengths to explain what this smile creature is and how it works. All of that is mostly left open to the imagination, but it does explain how the smile monster chooses its victims, and that's all we really need for this story. I haven't seen the second film yet, but if it does go more into the background of the smile monster, that would be fine if that's what that story is telling. But this first movie has a lot of really great messages about mental health and facing trauma, and honestly I found it really powerful, even though the ending kind of ruins the messaging a little bit in favor of having a better horror movie ending. Also, A-Train is in this movie.
Some shit birds.
Does absolutely nothing, leaves about halfway through, and we never see or hear from him again. I have absolutely no idea what the point of his character was. So as an overall movie, I'm going 8.5 out of 10, and scare factor is matched with an 8.5 out of 10. So having a sequel to a franchise on this list might be cheating a little bit, but with how off the rails this franchise went with a few of the recent films, it needed a bit of a reset, and that's exactly what Alien Romulus is. It has references that will please fans of the franchise, but also tells its own self-contained story. We meet the cast of younger characters, seeing their situations and how they're stuck on this awful planet that never has a day of sunlight, sympathize with their situation, and when there's a plan to finally get off the planet, they take it, only to get in way over their heads and unleash some awful things onto themselves and possibly the rest of the universe. This movie does a lot of the things that The Force Awakens and even Scream 5 did with their requels, but I actually think that the way Romulus handles things is far better than some of those other films. While the structure might be the same as the first Alien film, and this movie has a legacy character, I think that you can reasonably watch this film on its own without having seen the rest, and it'll still make a lot of sense. Maybe not. I've seen all the other Alien films, so if anybody has seen this movie without having seen any of the other Alien films, let me know if that statement holds true. This film was directed by Fede Alvarez, who I know best as the director of the Evil Dead remake and Don't Breathe, both horror movies that I thought were pretty great, so I had pretty high expectations for this movie. The scares are all unique among the Alien franchise, and I think that there's a lot of aspects with the lore that is played around with in this film in really cool ways. There's also the gun that has an aimbot on it, so that's pretty cool too. I know some people didn't care for the third act of this film, but for once I'm going to say that I actually liked it and I thought it made complete sense with the story they were telling. Overall, I'm going 8 out of 10 with a scare factor of a 6.5 out of 10. Earlier that a lot of horror movies like to keep up with contemporary times because they like the advancement of technology, but there's also the case that something can work in the past, especially if it's never been done before, and that's the case with Late Night with the Devil. With the lead role of this film, for what might be the first time ever, is this guy. Yeah, that's right, you probably recognize him as the guy from The Dark Knight, or The Suicide Squad, or Dune, or Prisoners. But yes, this guy has a name, and it's David Dastmalchian. He plays a late-night talk show host whose ratings are plummeting, so he makes some shady deals, and then as a last-ditch effort, he decides to have somebody on the show who is possessed by the devil. Now, I know that a lot of people don't watch late night TV anymore, and there's good reason for that, but back in the day, and back when this movie was set, late night TV was kind of like YouTube. It was a sort of amateurish way of watching your favorite celebrities and comedians, and just to see the ins and outs of the late night broadcast itself and forcing the show to go on because of ratings and their own egos. Well, it actually makes me think that this too could be a contemporary movie starring any of the late night talk show hosts now, except Conan, who's always fantastic and also doesn't have a late night TV show anymore, so good for him. Things get progressively more intense as the night goes on, tensions rise, some scary things happen on TV, but they continue with it because this show is more popular than anything they've done before it. The third act, like a lot of films on this list, isn't that great, but I feel like with this movie, that's more due to the budget than the story.
In terms of money, we have no money.
I mean, there's some bad CGI in the final act, and I mean bad CGI that took me right out of the story. But this is definitely worth a watch. Overall, I'll go 7.8 out of 10 with a scare factor of a 6 out of 10. This movie, along with Smile, has taught me to really reserve my judgment on today's horror movies until after I've seen them, because I thought that the trailer for both this and Smile weren't that great, but they are great movies. And I thought the trailer for Longlegs was phenomenal, but the movie is just okay. I also thought the trailer for Megan was terrible, or M3gan, but apparently that's a pretty good movie too. It's not on this list because I haven't seen it, but if it's worth a watch, let me know in the comments below. Talk to Me, once again, offers up a more contemporary story, with teenagers being obsessed with social media and wanting to show off, and the dangers that come with that. I also think this film has a pretty good message about mental health and drug use, but the story and scares are definitely more the focus in this one. And for that matter, I actually think that Smile and Talk to Me are both pretty similar movies. Like, could take place in the same universe type of movies because they both have the same sort of feelings and vibes to them. Not that I'm trying to give any studios any ideas. But this movie takes what is a pretty high concept and shows it to us right off the bat. There is some suspension of disbelief that needs to happen because I know myself as a teenager, and basically any other teenager, would not continuously use this hand that makes you see dead people, or at least I know I wouldn't do that, so I needed to kind of separate that fact to enjoy the movie, but as it went on, I could see this was more a metaphor for drug use, so once I saw that, it became much easier. I like the different friend and family dynamics, and again, just like Smile, this movie tells you just enough of what you need to know without overly explaining some of the mystery and horror aspects. And as a film made by former YouTubers, I of course have to tip my cap. As a film overall, I'm going 8 out of 10, and scare factor, I will also go 8 out of 10. There's a devil on my shoulder, I feel it. This next film I wouldn't call a straight up horror movie as much as it is a movie with horror aspects to it, but I still feel like it deserves way more recognition, and that's the film Abigail. Going into this movie, I knew exactly what it was about, but it became very clear that you weren't supposed to know what this movie was about, because as it goes on, the reveals are treated like huge surprises, but if you've watched the trailer, then you already know those reveals. I've been trying to keep this video mostly spoiler-free, but if you've, never heard of this movie and you don't know anything about it, go watch it without watching the trailer or reading a synopsis. You will have a much better experience. Also, skip over this portion of the video to the time on screen, because I'm about to go into spoiler territory in 3, 2, 1, okay. Okay, let's go. So Abigail, if you've read the synopsis or seen the trailer, is actually a vampire. But the way that the movie is structured and the way the mystery unravels, it's almost as if you're not supposed to know that. So I feel like the studio knew that they had a pretty good vampire flick on their hands, but couldn't figure out a way to market the movie without telling people straight up that there's vampires. So a lot of the integrity of the movie is compromised. And that's super unfortunate. I've watched this movie a few times with people who haven't heard of it, and they're always super happy with the twist and the outcome, and it's just a shame that the majority of people who watch this aren't going to experience the movie that way. There's a ragtag group of characters who come together to hold this little girl for ransom, only to then become the prey of the vampire Abigail. This movie is funny when it needs to be, gives each character their moment or moments to shine, and does a lot of really great things with vampire lore, even some new things that I've never seen before. It's a lot of fun, and as a film, I'll give it like a 7.6 out of 10, and as for scare factor, I mean, it's not really that scary, but it has some moments, and characters die that you actually care for, so I'm gonna go like 4 out of 10 for scariness. Now with this entry, I'm gonna cheat a little bit because this is actually 3 movies, and that's the X trilogy. Now, a lot of A24 people might be thinking that I've left so many A24 movies off this list because it's only this trilogy and Talk to Me, and that's because, quite honestly, I'm kinda getting sick of A24 horror movies. They all have that same quality to them, that caveman SpongeBob episode vibe.
What are you simpletons doing?
And this first movie, X, has all of that on full display. It has that eerie music, the wide shots that go on for way too long, crazy concepts that are more metaphorical than literal, and while I do enjoy these movies and A24 quite a bit, I'm just saying that a lot of them are starting to feel the same to me. And while X very much feels this way, I still think it's a great film. In particular, I want to say that I really like the dialogue in this film and the production design. This very much feels like a 70s horror movie, updated to look like an A24 film, and I'm saying that as a compliment because this does feel like a pretty unique movie in that way. Another way this film feels unique is that it very much is setting up a trilogy with the characters Maxine and Pearl, their shared hopes and dreams, and how that continues in both Pearl and Maxine, the movies. I think that the movie Pearl outshines the rest of them by a wide margin, and Maxine was sorta a letdown for me personally, but since I'm mainly focused on just talking about X, I'll give it a rating of 7 out of 10 with a scare factor of 6.5 out of 10.
Close your eyes, give me your hand.
Next up is another movie that I watched recently, and that's the 2024 movie Speak No Evil, which is actually a remake of a Dutch film of the same name. Now I know what you're probably thinking. Well, this American remake must be from a movie that came out years and years ago. Well, you're wrong, because the original film also falls under the criteria of this list because it was made in 2022. Why did we need to remake a movie that was only 2 years old? I have no idea, but both of these movies are incredibly similar. There's a few key differences. I'd say watch them both because they're both worth watching, but I'm going to talk about the American version for one key reason, and that's James McAvoy. James McAvoy is the most underrated actor working today by a wide margin. Every single movie I've ever seen him in, he's the best part of it, unless we're talking about the X-Men movies, because he shares that title with Michael Fassbender, who's also incredibly underrated. But from the very onset, McAvoy knows how to make you feel extremely uncomfortable and unnerved. And that goes on for basically the entire first half of the movie. There were some scenes that were so cringy and uncomfortable that I had to look away from the screen, but since this is all purposeful, it feels incredibly well done. This is certainly one of those movies that you can watch twice and pick up on so many different moments of foreshadowing and details that you missed the first time around because you weren't expecting certain turns of events. However, this movie is also victim to something Hollywood loves doing nowadays, and that's the 2-minute movie, the trailer. A lot of the big moments and even reveals are spoiled in this movie's trailer. There's still the one big twist and motivation in the movie that the trailer doesn't spoil, but it's incredibly easy to pick up on if you have already seen the trailer and know where this movie's going. All that being said, even if you know what's going to happen and where it's going, this is a movie that you want to see how the events unfold. You end up caring about this family and want to see how they either get out of this or how they could possibly end up losing. This is also the most effective type of horror in my opinion, and that's the psychological horror. Some people get really scared of ghosts or demons or lots of blood, but to me these types of psychological horror movies feel different, and it's by far the most effective on me personally. So as a movie itself, I'm going to go 8.5 out of 10, and for the horror aspect, I'm going 9 out of 10. Now this last one, I'll admit, is cheating a little bit, because it falls outside of the scope of the 2020s. This movie actually came out in 2019, but hang on, before you hit me with all the boos, this movie is incredibly underrated and deserves so much more credit than it gets. Like I mentioned with the last movie, this is another psychological horror, also blended with a small town mystery and drama. I know that out of all the movies on this list, this is probably the most unknown, so allow me to set the scene for you. In a small town, a 10-year-old boy goes missing, so the town's sheriff has to try and unravel the mystery of the disappearance while also dealing with his marital problems with his wife. His wife is convinced that there's some paranormal entity in the house with her that's putting their son in danger, and the sheriff uncovers that this boy's disappearance is similar to other cases. Now, that sounds like a whole lot of layers to the story, because it is, but I promise you this movie is absolutely worth the watch. All of these layers connect into a really fascinating story. The first half is like one movie, and the second half is like a different movie. It's truly a really great experience. That's honestly all I'm going to say about this one, in hopes that you go watch it for yourself. As of the time of posting this video, it is on American Netflix, so I urge you to go and give it a try if you like the other movies on this list. I See You gets a 9 out of 10 for an overall rating, and an 8 out of 10 for the scare factor. What other movies would you add to this list? And what are some upcoming movies that you think will eventually be on lists like this? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave it a like and subscribe for more content like this. Special thanks to all my channel members, you guys are the best. And I'll see you all in the next one.
Yeah.